The galaxy of Andromar was a mosaic of stars and civilizations, a sprawling expanse where myths and truths often intertwined. In its outermost reaches lay Valeth, a world of bioluminescent forests, crystalline cities, and skies that shimmered with cascading auroras. Yet, for all its beauty, Valetha's greatest mystery lay within the walls of its royal palace, Princess Serena, the veiled heir to the throne. Legends surrounded the princess. It was said that her beauty could halt a war, that her gaze held the power to calm raging tempests, and that her voice could soothe the most tormented souls. But there was a price to such magnificence. No one, not even her closest advisors, had seen her face. A veil made of shimmering stardust obscured her features, and her voice was only heard through intermediaries. It was decreed that only her true bondmate, chosen by destiny, could witness her visage without peril. For years, suitors had traveled from the farthest corners of the galaxy, lured by tales of her splendor and the immense power that bonding with her would bestow. All had failed, unable to bear the uncertainty of bonding with someone unseen. For the Valothians, her anonymity was a sacred tradition, a test of pure intent. To outsiders, it was a daunting mystery. Cal Mercer, however, was not one to shy away from mysteries. The human explorer had stumbled upon the tales of Valeth during his latest journey through the Andromar trade corridor. Restless and seeking his next adventure, he decided to see the enigmatic planet for himself. He arrived at Valeth aboard his trusty freighter, the Starlight Wanderer, a patchwork vessel that reflected his life of exploration and mischief. The landing process was surprisingly smooth, the Valothians welcoming yet cautious. Cal's appearance, a tall, lean human in a battered jacket and boots that had seen more alien worlds than most, drew curious glances. Though humans were not unheard of in the Andromar galaxy, they were still a rarity on Valeth. Within hours of his arrival, Cal learned of the Celestial Ball, a grand event held once every cycle to celebrate the princess and her would-be suitors. It was a spectacle of diplomacy, tradition, and, to Cal's mind, an irresistible opportunity for excitement. The ball took place in the Palace of Luminara, a structure that seemed to float above a lake of liquid light. As Cal stepped into the grand hall, he was struck by its otherworldly beauty. The ceiling sparkled like constellations, and the walls pulsed gently, responding to the emotions of the crowd. Delegates and dignitaries from every corner of the galaxy mingled, their attire a kaleidoscope of colors and materials that defied imagination. At the heart of the room stood Princess Serena, her form veiled in flowing stardust that shimmered with every movement. Her presence commanded both reverence and intrigue. Around her, a semicircle of suitors knelt, each awaiting the chance to present their case to the unseen princess. Despite himself, Cal felt a pang of curiosity. What kind of person could inspire such devotion, fear, and speculation? He moved closer, listening as one suitor, a Grylaxian noble, stammered through his declaration of love and loyalty. The princess did not respond, her silence as enigmatic as her concealed face. The noble left the circle in shame, his resolve shattered. Cal leaned toward a nearby attendee, a middle-aged Valothian clad in flowing robes. "What happens if someone actually bonds with her?" he whispered. The Valothian frowned, his iridescent eyes narrowing. "If they are worthy, they will share in her destiny, her power. If not—" He gestured vaguely, as if unwilling to say more. "The trials are not for the faint of heart, outsider." Cal smirked, his curiosity sharpening into determination. He'd come to Valeth for adventure, and here it was, wrapped in mystery and stardust. The evening wore on, and more suitors approached the princess, only to falter before the weight of the final challenge. A declaration was required, a willingness to bond without ever seeing her face. One by one, they hesitated, their ambitions crumbling beneath the enormity of the unknown. Cal watched the proceedings with growing amusement and frustration. Was no one willing to take a risk? He thought back to his own journeys to the star systems he'd charted, the dangers he'd faced, and the leaps of faith that had carried him across the galaxy. When the herald announced that the floor was open to any who dared to present themselves, Cal stepped forward. A murmur swept through the crowd. A human? An outsider? The notion seemed both absurd and scandalous. Cal bowed with a flourish that was half sincere, half mischievous. "Princess Serena," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "I've traveled countless light years, faced dangers most would never dream of, and stared into the unknown more times than I can count. What's one more leap?" The room fell silent. The stardust veil around the princess seemed to shimmer more brightly, as if acknowledging his boldness. The herald stepped forward, his voice formal and tinged with disbelief. "You understand the conditions, human? You may not see her face. The trials are perilous. And should you fail, dash." "I understand," Cal interrupted, his grin unwavering. "Let's see what destiny has in store." And with that, the stage was set. Cal Mercer, the human adventurer, had challenged the unknown. And Princess Serena, the unseen enigma, had found a suitor who dared to look beyond the veil. The announcement of Cal Mercer's intent to take on the trials spread through the palace like a shockwave. Veilothians whispered in hushed tones about the audacity of the human explorer, while the galaxy's dignitaries debated the odds of his success. Some dismissed him as a reckless fool, others admired his bravery. Regardless, all eyes were now on the outsider who dared to challenge the traditions of Vailith. As the celestial ball transitioned into the ceremonial trials, Cal was escorted to the Sanctum of Trials, a vast, ancient chamber hidden deep beneath the palace. The walls were lined with glowing glyphs that pulsed rhythmically, as if alive, and the air hummed with an energy that made his skin tingle. At the center of the chamber stood a massive crystalline obelisk. It radiated a soft, golden light and served as the focal point of the trials. Princess Serena's veiled form appeared on a raised platform above, her presence both serene and commanding. She raised her hand, and the first trial began. The Labyrinth of Shadows. The first trial was a test of courage and resolve. The sanctum transformed, its walls shifting to form a maze cloaked in darkness. The only source of light was a single lantern that glowed faintly in Cal's hand. "The Labyrinth of Shadows will test your will," the herald announced. "You must find the heart of the labyrinth while resisting the illusions it conjures. Fear and doubt will be your greatest enemies." Cal stepped forward, the lantern casting flickering light that barely illuminated the twisting paths ahead. As he ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and whispers began to echo around him. At first, they were indistinct murmurs, but soon they coalesced into voices taunting, accusing, and pleading. "You're unworthy," one voice sneered. "Turn back," another cried, trembling with fear. "Why risk your life for someone you've never seen?" a softer voice whispered. Cal gritted his teeth, forcing himself to ignore the voices. He'd faced worse in the uncharted void of space-ghost ships, hostile aliens, and the crushing loneliness of the unknown. Compared to that, this maze was child's play. But the illusions grew stronger. Shadows morphed into the shapes of his greatest regrets, friends he'd lost, worlds he'd failed to save, and the family he'd left behind on Earth. For a moment, he faltered, the weight of his past threatening to overwhelm him. Then he remembered why he was here. This wasn't just about the princess or the trials, it was about proving something to himself. With renewed determination, he pushed forward, following the faint pulse of energy that seemed to guide him. After what felt like hours, he reached the heart of the labyrinth, a glowing crystal that banished the shadows and restored light to the maze. The maze dissolved, and Cal found himself back in the sanctum, greeted by a murmur of surprise and approval from the onlookers. The first trial was complete. The Codes of Corinthus. The second trial tested intelligence and adaptability. Cal was presented with an ancient Veilothian artifact, a metallic cube inscribed with intricate glyphs. The herald explained, the Codes of Corinthus contain the secrets of Vailitha's ancestors. To solve this puzzle, you must decipher the glyphs and unlock the cube's core. Failure will result in the artifact's destruction. Cal steadied the cube, his mind racing. The glyphs seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as he touched the surface, creating an ever-changing puzzle. He realized that this wasn't just a test of intelligence, it was also a test of intuition. As he worked, the crowd watched in tense silence. Even Princess Serena leaned forward slightly, her veiled face tilted as if intrigued. Cal noticed this and smirked to himself. "Guess I'm putting on a good show," he muttered. The puzzle grew more complex, but Cal found a rhythm, letting his instincts guide him. He thought of it like navigating an asteroid field, anticipating the flow of the patterns rather than fighting them. Finally, the cube emitted a soft chime and opened, revealing a small, glowing orb. The crowd erupted in applause. The second trial was complete. The Mirror of Truth. The third and final trial tested the purity of Cal's intentions. He was led to the Mirror of Truth, a towering, shimmering surface that reflected more than mere appearances. The mirror reveals the deepest truths of one's heart, the herald intoned. If your intentions are pure, you will pass. If not, the mirror will consume your spirit. Cal approached the mirror, his reflection staring back at him. At first, it was just him, a rugged explorer with a perpetual grin and a spark of mischief in his eyes. But then the image began to shift, revealing fragments of his soul. He saw himself standing on Earth, saying goodbye to his family before embarking on his first interstellar voyage. He saw the guilt he carried for not returning sooner, for choosing the stars over the people he loved. He saw moments of triumph, loss, and loneliness. Finally, the mirror showed him standing before Princess Serena, her face still veiled. In the reflection, she reached out to him, and he took her hand, not out of ambition or desire for power, but out of genuine curiosity and a willingness to embrace the unknown. The mirror shimmered and dissolved, signaling that he had passed the trial. The Declaration. When Cal returned to the sanctum, the herald stepped forward. "Cal Mercer, you have completed the trials. Now, the final challenge awaits, the Declaration. Will you bond with Princess Serena, knowing that you may never see her face?" The crowd held its breath. Cal glanced at the princess, her veiled figure radiating an enigmatic grace. He thought about the trials, the whispers, and the truths he had faced. "I will," he said, his voice steady. "Because what matters isn't what I see, but what I've come to understand." The chamber erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps. Princess Serena raised her hand, and the air around her seemed to glow. The final challenge was over, but the journey was just beginning. The atmosphere in the Sanctum of Trials was electric with tension and anticipation. Cal Mercer, the human adventurer who had dared to take on Vailith's sacred challenges, now stood as the first outsider to complete them. But the journey was far from over. Unbeknownst to him, his bold actions had roused enemies within the royal court, those who feared what his success could mean for the traditions and power structures of Vailith. The rising threat deep within the palace, a clandestine meeting was taking place. Lord Draven, a high-ranking noble and staunch traditionalist, paced the room, his robes trailing behind him like a shadow. Around him stood a group of like-minded nobles, their faces grim. "This human is a threat to everything we stand for," Draven hissed, slamming his fist on the table. "If he bonds with the princess, he will disrupt the delicate balance of our society. Outsiders cannot be trusted with the sacred bond." "But he passed the trials," another noble interjected hesitantly. The princess herself seemed to approve. Draven's eyes glinted dangerously. "The trials are a test of courage and character, not of worthiness to rule. If we do nothing, an outsider will gain influence over our people and our future." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Draven's plan was clear. They would sabotage Cal's path to the bond and ensure that Vailith remained under the control of its own people. A bond beyond ceremony. Meanwhile, Cal was escorted to the Chamber of Eternity, where the bonding ceremony was set to take place. Princess Serena awaited him, her veiled presence an ethereal beacon. Though her face was hidden, Cal could sense her observing him, her energy a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. "I must admit, I didn't expect to get this far, Cal said with a wry grin. I'm more of a play-it-by-ear kind of guy. Serena tilted her head slightly, her veil shimmering with faint amusement. Few have your courage, she said, her voice soft yet resonant, echoing through the chamber like a melody. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. Cal's smile softened. It's not just courage. I think it's curiosity and maybe a little stubbornness. Before their conversation could continue, the chamber shook slightly. A flicker of unease crossed Serena's stance. Cal's instincts sharpened. He knew danger when he felt it. The ambush as the ceremony began, the lights in the chamber dimmed, and a series of glowing symbols appeared on the floor, forming a complex pattern. Cal and Serena stepped into the center, their movements synchronized as if guided by an unseen force. But just as the symbols began to pulse with life, a sudden explosion rocked the room. A group of armed nobles, led by Lord Draven, stormed in. They carried disruptor weapons and devices designed to interfere with the energy fields that powered the palace's ancient systems. Stop this madness! Draven bellowed, his voice reverberating through the chamber. This human has no place in our traditions. He will destroy everything we have built. Guards rushed in, but the nobles had come prepared, their disruptors creating chaos in the chamber. The bonding ceremony was halted, its intricate patterns destabilized. Cal's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Looks like I'm not exactly the guest of honor anymore, he muttered. He turned to Serena. Any suggestions? Her voice was calm despite the chaos. The obelisk at the center controls the chamber's defenses. If we can reach it, I can restore order. Got it, Cal said, drawing a small plasma pistol from his jacket. Stick close. Trust under fire. The journey to the obelisk was fraught with danger. Cal and Serena moved as a unit, their unlikely partnership tested by the relentless assault of Draven's forces. Cal's quick reflexes and unorthodox tactics honed from years of surviving hostile environments proved invaluable. He dodged disruptor blasts and returned fire with precision, all while keeping an eye on Serena. For her part, Serena demonstrated her own resourcefulness. Though she avoided direct confrontation, her knowledge of the palace's systems allowed her to manipulate their surroundings. At one point, she activated a hidden mechanism that created a force field, shielding them from an oncoming attack. As they reached the obelisk, Draven and his forces cornered them. You cannot defy tradition. Draven snarled. This bond is a mockery. Cal stepped forward, his weapon raised. Funny thing about tradition, it's just another word for habit. And habits can change. Before Draven could respond, Serena placed her hands on the obelisk. The chamber pulsed with a brilliant light, and an energy wave emanated outward, disarming the attackers and restoring order. Guards subdued the remaining nobles, and Draven was taken into custody, his plans thwarted. The aftermath. As the dust settled, Cal turned to Serena, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. You handled that like a pro. She inclined her head, her voice warm. And you proved yourself once again. Perhaps this bond was always meant to be. The ceremony resumed, the symbols on the floor reigniting with renewed vigor. This time, there were no interruptions. As Cal and Serena stood at the center of the chamber, a profound connection formed between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended words, appearances, and tradition. The bond was sealed, not through sight or superficiality, but through trust, shared trials, and the courage to face the unknown together. Unbeknownst to them, their actions that day would ripple across the galaxy, changing not only the fate of Valeth, but also the perception of unity among the stars. The Chamber of Eternity was silent, save for the resonant hum of the crystalline obelisk at its center. As the bond between Cal Mercer and Princess Serena was sealed, a radiant wave of energy pulsed outward, illuminating the room in hues of gold and violet. It was a moment that transcended the boundaries of tradition and convention. A human and an alien princess united, not by sight, but by shared resolve and trust. The energy of the bond connected their minds, their thoughts interwoven in a way Cal had never experienced. Images, emotions, and fragments of Serena's life poured into his consciousness. He saw her childhood, the weight of her veiled existence, and the loneliness that had come with being untouchable, unknowable. In return, she saw his adventurous spirit, his longing for meaning beyond the stars, and the ache of the connections he had left behind on Earth. In that instant, they understood one another completely. A new era for Valeth. The next morning, the palace was abuzz with activity. News of Cal and Serena's successful bond had spread like wildfire across Valeth and beyond. For many, it was a moment of celebration, a sign that the old ways could evolve, that even an outsider could be worthy of the sacred bond. For others, particularly the traditionalists who still clung to the idea of exclusivity, it was a bitter pill to swallow. In the grand throne room, Serena addressed the gathered nobles and dignitaries, her veil shimmering as she spoke. Cal stood by her side, a steady presence in a room filled with skepticism. Our bond was forged not through familiarity or convention, Serena began, her voice calm yet commanding, but through trust and understanding. Cal has shown that courage and integrity transcend species and borders. Together, we will guide Valeth into a future of unity and openness. Some in the crowd cheered, while others remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Lord Draven, stripped of his title and standing in shackles, glared at the pair with undisguised contempt. Yet even he could not deny the power of the bond that now radiated between the princess and the human. The Galactic Council. The bond between Cal and Serena had far-reaching implications beyond Valeth. Delegates from the Galactic Council, a coalition of star systems promoting peace and cooperation, arrived on the planet to witness the historic union. For decades, Valeth had maintained a position of isolation, its traditions and power keeping it apart from the Council's efforts. Now, with Cal's influence and Serena's leadership, that stance began to shift. At a summit convened in the stellar atrium, Serena and Cal presented their vision for a united future. Cal's words carried the weight of an outsider who had come to understand Valeth's traditions and strengths. Serena's eloquence and charisma swayed even the most skeptical council members. The strength of a civilization lies not in its walls, Cal said during the summit, but in its willingness to build bridges. The galaxy is vast, and our survival depends on finding common ground. The council voted unanimously to welcome Valeth as a member, marking a new chapter in galactic history. The princess unveiled. Despite their growing influence, there was one tradition Cal and Serena had yet to confront, the unveiling of her face. It was a moment reserved only for the one who had bonded with her, and the ceremony was considered the most sacred event in Valothian culture. On the appointed day, Cal stood alone in the sanctum of reflection, a secluded chamber adorned with crystalline murals that seemed to depict the history of the galaxy itself. Serena entered, her veil glinting with starlight. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of solemnity and vulnerability. Cal hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the weight of the moment. "I've seen who you are, Serena. That's what matters most." She stepped closer, her hands lifting the veil slowly. As it fell away, Cal finally saw her face, a radiant blend of features that seemed to encapsulate the beauty of the cosmos. Her skin glimmered faintly, her eyes were like twin nebulae, and her expression held a timeless grace. For a moment, Cal was speechless. Then he smiled, the same disarming grin he'd worn since the day they met. "Worth the wait," he said simply. Serena laughed, the sound light and unrestrained, as if years of burden had been lifted. The journey ahead. With the unveiling complete, Cal and Serena stood at the threshold of a new era, not just for Valeth, but for the galaxy. Their bond symbolized a future where differences could be celebrated, where tradition and progress could coexist, and where even the most distant stars could feel a little closer. As they prepared to leave the palace on a diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council's central hub, Cal turned to Serena. "So, what's next for the galaxy's most famous couple?" Serena smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. The galaxy is vast, Cal. Let's find out together. They boarded the Starlight Wanderer, its engines roaring to life. As the ship ascended into the sparkling expanse of Andromar, one thing was certain: their adventure had only just begun.